In this video, we're going to look at a couple of ways that the product rule gets a little bit more interesting. First, if you have the product of three factors instead of just two, it's the same rule, you just extend it a little bit. So the product of three factors, we'll call those factors u, v, and w, is going to be the sum of three terms. Each one of those terms is going to have one derivative, or the derivative of one of the factors, times the other two factors. So u prime times vw, v prime times uw, and w prime times uv. In other words, you're taking the derivative one term at a time. So we can take a look at what that looks like for this example. We've got three terms here, three factors, x to the sixth, cosine of x, and 2 to the x. So the derivative of this function would start with the derivative of the first of those factors, 6x to the fifth, times the other two factors exactly as they appear. So notice how each time we are going to take the derivative of one at a time. And then the second term would have the derivative of the second of those factors, so negative sine of x. I'll just change that plus to a minus sign. And then the other two factors will just be exactly the way it appeared, x to the sixth, 2 to the x. So again, it's the cosine of x, this derivative I took here. And then in the last term, the derivative we're going to take is the derivative of 2 to the x, which we learned in the earlier this week is 2 to the x times the ln of 2 times x to the sixth times the cosine of x, and that's it. If you want to go through that and try and factor things out, it looks to me like the only factors there would be 2x to the fifth would be a factor, but it's not even worth your time. Just leave it like that. That's your answer. The other thing we're going to do, the other type of example we'll see, is when the product rule and chain rules start interacting with each other. So we'll look at a couple examples here. I'm actually going to go with g of x first because I think it's more interesting than f of x. Give myself some more room. So one thing that's important to do is take a look at the entire function on the whole and describe it using the words we've learned for different kinds of functions: product, composite, sum, something like that. So on the whole, this g of x, this function, is a product. Now, within each of those factors, we certainly do have a composition. But what I want you to think about first is, since the entire thing is a product, the entire derivative on the whole is going to be a sum. I want you to visualize that before you get started so that way you know where you're headed, what your answer should look like in the end. So we're going to apply the product rule on the whole. The first times the derivative of the second, so that's cosine of ln of x times the derivative of the second, and the derivative of the second is a little bit more complicated because when we take the derivative of the sine of ln of x, there's your composition. So we need to use the chain rule. It's the derivative of the outside evaluated at the inside times the derivative of the inside, so times 1 over x. That's the derivative of the sine of ln of x. And then we're going to move on to the second term, which is the second times the derivative of the first. So the derivative of the first is the derivative of the outside evaluated at the inside times the derivative of the inside. And we actually can do some putting together there. That is the cosine squared of the ln of x. Notice this negative sign. So minus the sine squared of the ln of x. Since both fractions are over x, I can put the whole thing over x. And it's fine if you leave it like this, but it is worth pointing out that cosine squared minus sine squared, that is one of your trig identities you learned in pre-calc. And that is the cosine of double the angle. The cosine of 2 ln of x over x would be the simplest way to write that one. That was an example where the product, the whole thing was a product, and inside of the product is a composition. H of x is a little bit different. H of x, the whole thing is a composition, and inside the composition is a product. So this one's going to be a little bit different, where on the whole we're thinking of chain rule, and within part of that chain rule we're going to use the product rule. So on the whole it's the chain rule. The derivative of the outside, well, the outside is a square root, so it's 1 over 2 times the square root times the derivative of the inside, and it's the derivative of the inside where we have to think about the product rule. So that's the derivative of the first times the second plus the derivative of the second times the first. And to clean it up, I will put the fraction together. 2x cosine of x minus x squared sine of x over 2 times the square root of x squared cosine of x. And there is a little bit more cleaning up I can do, because I can actually simplify that square root a little bit, but it gets complicated, so I'm going to leave it the way it is.